The grey November morning carried a melancholy that lingered over Eldermont, as if the town hid secrets in the shadows of its oak trees. Officer Alaric Nolan adjusted the scarf around his neck as he patrolled the residential neighborhoods. Eldermont was small, the kind of place where everyone knew each other, but something about that morning felt off. That's when he saw her. Sitting on the curb of a narrow street was a girl, curled up with her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her light brown hair was tangled, and her clothes, clearly inadequate for the cold, seemed to have seen better days. She was trembling, but it wasn't just the cold. It was her eyes that caught Alaric's attention, grey and deep, filled with fear and a silent plea. He braked the car and stepped out cautiously. "Are you all right?" he asked in a calm yet firm voice, kneeling to her level. That behavior set off every alarm in the officer's mind. He knew he had to act quickly. The girl hesitated again but murmured, "Rowan." At the station they gave her a blanket and a cup of hot chocolate, which she accepted with trembling hands. As Rowan warmed up, Alaric took a photo of her and sent it to police departments in the region, asking for help identifying her. It wasn't long before they received a response. She explained that Rowan was an orphan who lived in a small shelter in the center of Eldermont. However, she had mysteriously disappeared a few days earlier, leaving the staff worried. Her eyes widened and she shook her head rapidly, whispering, "I don't want to go back there." Alaric felt a chill run down his spine as he drove along the winding road toward the secluded neighborhood. The area was known for its grand mansions, but something in the air felt off. "Stay here, we'll be close," Imogen said, trying to reassure her. Merrick Thornhill, the owner, looked to be around 50, with slicked back grey hair and deep-set eyes that seemed to scrutinize every move. His posture was impeccable, but his expression was cold and distrustful. Merrick raised an eyebrow and tilted his head slightly. "A girl? I have no idea what you're talking about. I live alone and don't have visitors." A narrow staircase led to the basement, and a faint draft seemed to be coming from there. The girl remained in the car, but her eyes followed their every movement through the window, visibly terrified. It was enough to set off alarm bells in Alaric's mind. The officer pressed him. "We'll need to check this too," Merrick said, crossing his arms. He replied quickly, but his tone had changed. There was fear there. Without waiting for a response, Imogen opened the door. The dark corridor that was revealed was narrow and claustrophobic, with concrete walls and the smell of mold. She hesitated before opening it, her heart pounding. When the door swung open, the beam of the flashlight illuminated the interior, and what she saw made her stomach turn. Imogen immediately knelt down, trying not to frighten them further. "You're safe now. My name is Imogen. We're going to get you out of here." When Imogen emerged from the basement carrying one of the children, Alaric saw Merrick's expression change. It was no longer cold indifference. It was desperation. Deep down she knew the first battle had been won. Rowan, the key to uncovering everything, seemed to carry far more on her shoulders than any child should have to bear. Imogen sat next to Peter in the interview room, holding a cup of juice in her hand. Her tone was gentle, almost maternal. "Hi, Peter. I know you've been through a lot, but we want to help, and we need to understand what happened. Do you remember how you ended up there?" The boy hesitated, staring at the floor. His small hands gripped his knees tightly, but then he began to speak, his voice low and trembling with fear. "They said they were taking me to a safe place, but it was a lie. First, it was a man who picked me up off the street. Then they brought me to that house. They locked us in there and said no one would ever find us." Imogen held back the tears that threatened to surface. "Were there other people besides the man who brought you? Do you remember any names, any details?" Peter looked at her, his eyes full of fear. "I heard them talking about the next transport. They said they were going to send us away soon, but I don't know where. There was a man with white hair, like Mr. Thornhill. He seemed to be the boss." Imogen left the room and found Alaric in the hallway. He was on the phone, coordinating a warrant to search the boxes in Thornhill's mansion, which likely hid crucial evidence. When he hung up, Imogen shared what Peter had said. "It seems Merrick wasn't acting alone. There are others involved, possibly a larger network," she concluded, her voice heavy with determination. "What about Rowan? Do you think she saw more than she's told us?" Alaric asked, glancing at the room where Rowan was resting on a small sofa, hugging a blanket. "I'm sure she did, but she's so scared that I don't want to pressure her. We need her to feel safe before trying to get more information," Imogen replied. As the two talked, Odette Wainwright arrived at the station. The elderly woman was visibly emotional. Her steps were slow but determined, and her eyes softened when they landed on Rowan. "Oh, my dear, are you okay?" Odette asked, kneeling beside the girl. Rowan, who had been silent until then, threw her arms around Odette, finally allowing herself to cry. The scene moved Alaric deeply, and he stood still for a moment, watching the connection between the two. "Can she come with me?" Odette asked, turning to the officers. "I'll take care of her as if she were my own granddaughter." Imogen hesitated, but knew Rowan needed comfort and a welcoming environment. "For now, yes. But Odette, we'll need Rowan's help to understand what happened. We'll talk to her again when she's ready." That night, while Rowan slept at Odette's house, Alaric and Imogen returned to Thornhill's mansion to inspect the boxes Peter had mentioned. With the warrant in hand, they began opening the packages, finding documents, photographs, and even financial records. Among the discoveries were fake passports for children and transportation tickets to various cities. "Look at this," Alaric said, handing a paper to Imogen. It was a list of names and dates, some already crossed out. At the bottom of the list, the name Rowan was written, followed by a date just 2 days away. "They were getting ready to move her," Imogen murmured, a chill running down her spine. "We don't have much time to figure out who else is involved." The next day, Alaric decided to visit Rowan at Odette's house. When he arrived, he found the girl in the garden, helping Odette plant flowers, as if trying to distract herself from the terrible memories. Noticing the officer's presence, Rowan tensed, but Alaric crouched down to her level. "Hi, Rowan. How are you?" he asked gently. The girl shrugged without responding. He reached into his coat pocket and handed her a small keychain of a white rabbit. "I used to keep this in my car. It gave me courage when I was scared. Maybe it'll help you too." Rowan looked at the keychain for a moment, then whispered, "Thank you." After a moment of silence, she spoke again, her voice hesitant. "At the house, in the basement, I heard them talking about other houses, places where they keep more kids." Alaric felt his heart race. "Do you remember any details, any names?" Rowan clutched the keychain tightly as if drawing courage from it. Then she murmured, "I think I heard someone say Ravenswood." The name wasn't familiar to Alaric, but he knew it was a clue. He thanked Rowan and promised they would do everything to stop those evil men. As he left, he ran into Imogen, who had just arrived. "She gave us something. Ravenswood. We need to figure out what it means." Imogen nodded, and the two headed to the precinct, knowing this clue could mark the beginning of a new and dangerous phase in their investigation. Ravenswood. The name was a clue, but also a mystery. Alaric and Imogen spent hours at the station, combing through maps, old records, and databases in search of any connection to the term. It didn't take long before they found something. Ravenswood was the name of an abandoned property on the outskirts of Eldemont, a former psychiatric hospital decommissioned over 3 decades ago. "It's the perfect place to hide. Big, isolated, no one would notice any activity there," Imogen commented, flipping through yellowed files containing information about the property. "And terrifying," Alaric added, raising his eyes to the detailed map of the area. "It's a dense zone surrounded by forests. If they're using the place, it'll be tough to get there without alerting them." The two decided to act quickly. They knew every minute mattered to save other children who might still be there. Early the next morning, alongside a tactical police team, they set out for Ravenswood. The weather was darker than ever, with heavy clouds covering the sky and a wind whistling through the tall trees that produced an almost supernatural sound. When they arrived at the property, what they saw confirmed their worst fears. The hospital was in ruins, with shattered windows and walls covered in moss and vines, but the signs of recent activity were undeniable. There were tire tracks in the muddy ground, fresh footprints, and even a faint plume of smoke rising from a chimney. "They're here," Imogen murmured, gripping her gun tightly as she signaled the team to split up. Alaric and Imogen led the search inside the hospital, moving silently through the dark, decaying hallways. The smell of mold and abandonment was nearly unbearable, but there were other disturbing signs. Discarded food wrappers, old blankets, and personal belongings scattered about. Eventually, they reached a locked room in the basement. The door was reinforced, unlike any other in the building, immediately raising their suspicions. While the team used tools to break it open, Imogen felt a knot form in her stomach. What would they find inside? When the door finally gave way, the sight that greeted them was even more horrifying than Merrick's mansion. The room was divided by metal cages, like makeshift cells. Inside, children were huddled together, some crying, others completely motionless. The air was heavy, and the initial silence was broken by the soft voices of the children whispering in unison. "You came to save us." Imogen quickly dropped to her knees, reaching out to a girl who was closest to her. "Yes, we came to save you. Everything's going to be okay now." The team began freeing the children, while Alaric struggled to contain the anger building within him. Who could do something so cruel? In the corner of the room, they found a bulletin board covered with photos and documents, all meticulously organized. Among them was a list with more children's names and the next locations where they were to be sent. "Imogen, look at this," Alaric called, holding up the papers. She took one and her eyes widened. "This confirms what Merrick said. This is bigger than we thought. These documents point to other locations in different states. They have an entire network. As they processed the information, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Alaric raised his weapon quickly, as did the other officers, but it was too late. One of the men from the network, still on the property, had lit an incendiary bomb on the upper floor, trying to destroy the evidence and cover their tracks. "Everyone out now," Alaric shouted as flames began spreading through the hallways. Imogen and the team ran, carrying the children in their arms, but the fire spread quickly. Smoke filled the floors, making it hard to see or breathe. Alaric, who had stayed behind to ensure no one was left behind, heard a sound coming from a nearby cabinet. Opening it, he found a small boy curled up, coughing from the smoke. "I've got you," he said, scooping the child into his arms and running toward the exit, flames licking at his heels. Outside, the children were being wrapped in blankets and attended to by paramedics. Imogen quickly counted them and felt a wave of relief when she realized everyone had been rescued. When she saw Alaric emerge from the building with the last boy in his arms, she felt such immense relief that she nearly collapsed to her knees. "Are you crazy? Why did you stay inside?" she asked, trying to hide her emotion. "I wasn't going to leave anyone behind," he replied, breathless but with a relieved smile on his face. The Ravenswood property burned to ashes, but the evidence collected before the fire was enough to continue the investigation. Later that night, while the rescued children were being cared for in support centers, Alaric and Imogen met at the station to review the documents they had salvaged. Her too. The next morning dawned with clear skies, almost as if the city of Eldamont itself was trying to breathe after the dark events of recent days. The Ravenswood rescue had been the first major blow against the exploitation network, but Alaric and Imogen knew the fight was far from over. In their hands, they held a list of names, locations, and clues that would lead them to others involved in the scheme, but they needed to act quickly to prevent more children from disappearing. But Alaric and Imogen were focused on one goal: dismantling the network completely. "He uses his company's trucks to move the children," Imogen said, holding the documents that confirmed the connection. "Kinsley is the next target." The elderly woman had transformed the guest room into a cozy space for the girl, filling it with children's books and a handmade quilt that had once belonged to her daughter. Rowan still carried deep trauma, but small signs of improvement were beginning to show. "Why do you think that?" she asked softly. Based on the information they had gathered, they knew he used a warehouse on the outskirts of Boston to hide the children before transporting them to other states. The location was heavily guarded, and the operation required precision and care. When they finally moved in, the resistance was minimal. Victor Kinsley tried to escape through the back but was intercepted by Alaric, who cuffed him without hesitation. Seized computers revealed financial transactions, transportation records, and communications with other members of the network. With Kinsley in custody, the case gained national attention, and arrests began happening in other states. The town, once known for its quietness, was now seen as a symbol of courage and resilience. "Her too, almost all of them, but we're working on it," said Imogen, kneeling down to the girl's level, "and we couldn't have done it without your help." Rowan, now safe and surrounded by love, was beginning to rebuild her life. Alaric and Imogen, for their part, knew their work wasn't done yet, but they felt a sense of relief, knowing that, at least in that small town, justice had prevailed. Eldamont still had its ancient oaks and quiet streets, but it now carried the mark of its greatest triumph: the courage to face evil and the determination to fight for those who couldn't defend themselves. We have amazing stories almost every day. Click the links appearing on the screen to explore other stories, just as emotional as this. See you next time.